Hello, my name is Kristin Snowden. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California, but this is not therapy. This is kind of just a live webinar, psychoeducational discussion and group around the topic of how to bring about change in your relationship in the healthier arena. So how to improve various dynamics in your relationships in order to have healthier, deeper, intimate connection with your loved ones. This is not just necessarily about your primary relationship, if you have a romantic primary relationship, but also friends, families, colleagues, etc. So today, speaking of the topic that can kind of span all types of relationships, we're going to talk about how to improve communication. So communication skills. First, kind of putting a name to maybe ineffective ways of communicating. So things, kind of common mistakes that we make when we're trying to communicate with other people, and then talk about how we can kind of improve those skill sets. Because obviously, a lot of people who are chiming in are often in a relationship crisis issue, and we tend to not be able to transcend that pain or the relationship struggle without the ability to communicate it with that partner, talk about our hurt, talk about our fears, have a better understanding about why the person did what they did, and then kind of try to move on from there. It's really important to understand that humans give nonverbal and verbal cues all day, every day. We have face expressions, the tone of our voice, the body language that we use, the words that we choose, eye contact or lack of contact sends a million messages, kind of unconscious messages that we pick up. And we call them, in the psychology world, we sometimes call them meta messages. So they're not even necessarily the words that I'm saying to you, but the little meta messages, the mini messages that come from those moments. And it's really interesting when you start looking at everyone's meta messages, their body language, when you pick up that you're like, ooh, why do I feel like that person doesn't like me? Or why do I feel like that person's unsafe? Or there's something going on there. It's really fascinating to start exploring the meta messages of how you're interpreting their behavior, their body language, their tone of voice, etc. If you want to know more about that subject, you can read a really fascinating book called The Gift of Fear. It's by Gavin de Becker, and it kind of talks about how we have these amazing unconscious, subconscious instincts to kind of pick up these messages. One of the most interesting things he says is that think about how we drive on streets every day. We are going at high speeds every day with just a painted dotted line between us, and yet we survive. You know, I mean, granted, there are a lot of car accidents, but it's amazing to think that we're driving at these really high speeds, and it's often just because there's these tiny little messages of like, okay, that person's swerving, slow down, okay, I see that person doing that, and you're picking up on all these tiny little meta messages all the time. So the very first rule of communication is to know that it's not just the words that are being exchanged between humans, that we have to pay attention to the tiny unconscious, subconscious messages, and know that we are filtering all of those based on our core belief system that we've kind of just gathered through growing up in our cultural system, our experiences with other people, what I call the shame voices. So those voices in you that are saying like, oh, what he's really saying is that you're not enough, or that, you know, they're on to you. They realize that you are not, you know, good in this way and that way. And then our past history and traumas, obviously. So you have to understand your communication style and your partner's communication style. And so let's kind of talk about how that can occur within a relationship dyad. If you have an unhealthy way of communicating, you know, if you're kind of listening to this already and going, ugh, I am really terrible at communicating, I want to say that, kind of relieve you of the fact that it's not your fault. You know, if you learn about communication and when we talk about emotions, we often find that we learn them by watching other people. You know, they're modeled to us from our family, our caretakers, friends, people around us when we're growing up. So it's really important to start asking yourself, how were your wants and needs, well, how were wants and needs communicated by other people around you? So how did people say, I need you to do this, I'm not okay when you do this? And then also the emotions, the expression of emotions that might have been tied in. You know, was everyone free and open to share anger, joy, confusion, disappointment, frustration, fear? And then how did those around you handle conflict? So think back for when parents or loved ones or colleagues or, I'm sorry, or caretakers, teachers, when there was a conflict, two people were in disagreement, how did that experience, how was it exchanged between people? So think back on those, and did those around you express emotions? How did you know that people were in conflict? How did you know that other people were mad, sad, glad, afraid? So kind of picking up the messages that you already have to kind of pick up, was it face expressions? Was it tone of voice? Was it someone stomping around the house and slamming things down? Was it, you know, you'd ask one question and they kind of blow up on you, and that's how you'd know what mood that they were in. And then the really important question is to understand kind of gender specific rules around that. How were women supposed to communicate? What were the rules around that? What were they allowed to say and express? How were men allowed to communicate? What were the expectations around that? And how were children allowed to speak? You know, there's that saying, children are to be seen and not heard. Were children given a voice of like, hey, you're upset, what's going on? How are you, you know, how was your day? How are things going at school? How, or, you know, a child disagreeing, how am I, how are you feeling about that? You sound really angry, what's going on there? So some of the greatest work you can do in communication is just start observing these things. Some of these things are so unconscious that you don't even know that it's happening. And it's kind of what bleeds into a large amount of our ineffective communication skills. So pay attention to that. So when we're not allowed to have a voice that is heard, valued, and understood, then we might grow up feeling like we can't be heard, or we're not valued, or we're not understood in adulthood. So it's interesting to think right now, are there relationships where you do feel valued, heard, understood? And then maybe relationships where that is not the case. So think about it. Do you have people in your life where you kind of feel like no holds barred, you can kind of share what you're thinking, even when it's maybe not totally appropriate, where you can kind of sort the thoughts out as you're going through them? And then some where you just are very hyper vigilant about what you're saying, how you're saying it, and think about what conditions alter that experience. You know, the people where you feel like you can be seen and heard and understood, what is present there that allows you to feel safe enough to do that? And then what is absent, or maybe other entities that are present that make you feel unsafe with another group of people? Another really important thing is to acknowledge that because our human condition is so sensitive to all forms of communication, all meta messages, tones of voices, everything, we have a very sensitive trauma, hyper arousal trigger to every engagement with every human being. So I talk about this all the time, but I want you to acknowledge this kind of involuntary response that we all have. And the more trauma and more trauma history you have, the more extreme this response is going to be. But we have this whole limbic system back here that's meant to, we call it the lizard brain, that's, you know, very from the caveman ages. Its sole purpose is to just identify threats and keep us safe. It runs on very little oxygen, very little blood supply. So it is the first thing on in our brain when it's experiencing engagements with things around us in the environment. It's what triggers our fight, flight, or freeze. And that is what will first most often turn on before our executive functioning part of our brain, which is where kind of rational thought, vetting what is accurate and what is inaccurate, being aware of the other person and your stance, and oh, that's just, you know, I'm being triggered from an old memory, but this is what's really going on. Emotional regulation, so being able to kind of calm your nerves or calm your increased blood pressure. That takes extra blood supply and extra oxygen. So when you are in communication, the more you can slow things down, the less you will spend in your fight, flight, or freeze. I, just as an example, like one of my biggest communication flaws is when I'm in a heated topic. So when someone is in disagreement or they're talking about something that's really hitting at my shame voices, I will feel myself get flooded. And at that time, you know, and so that's that limbic system. I'm in some kind of fight, flight, or freeze state. And at that time, I am no longer able to hear the content of that person's words, of what they're actually trying to say to me. All I am doing in that moment is thinking about what I'm going to say back, or how I'm going to defend myself, or how I'm going to negate whatever they're saying. So you can see that that's not a very effective exchange of information, because I can't even be present for their words. I'm just thinking about how I'm going to defend myself. And you have to do maybe some deep breathing, or pause the conversation, or do some grounding exercises. So that's kind of where grounding exercises in a nutshell are just something that keeps you in your body, in the present moment, instead of out there. Like I said, if all I'm doing is thinking about how I'm going to defend myself, grounding exercises would be me kind of saying, oh, wow, you know, your heart is racing, but you know, you're in your room. There's actually nothing that is threatening you right now. Your partner is just trying to give you feedback on something that you did that upset him. You're safe. You're okay. You can be present for what he's saying to you. Kind of these, so deep breathing, because obviously this runs on little oxygen. This needs extra oxygen. So do this executive functioning part of your brain a favor and add some extra oxygen to your body to slow things down, bring that heart rate back down, and then you can stay more present. So again, we're not even talking about communication styles at this point. It's just, these are all things to pay attention to, that before words even come out of your mouth can help you kind of be a more effective communicator, especially during heated moments or times of crisis. So the goal of communication is to communicate clearly, assertively, and respectfully. And the following ways are kind of pitfalls in the way that we can communicate. So there's passive communication. There's three types of, let's say, ineffective communication that we would like to improve, which would be passive communication, aggressive communication, and then passive aggressive communication. So passive communicators are those who are always kind of hiding or disguising what they're really thinking and really feeling. They don't really want to say what they mean. Sometimes it's because they just genuinely don't know. They've never been from that group, that population that has never felt like they've been seen and heard and understood. So they've never generally been able to practice understanding what they feel and think and are experiencing. So sometimes passive communication is just about becoming reconnected with all that unconscious stuff that I was just talking about. But they don't advocate for themselves. They don't assert any of their wants or needs. But all human beings have wants and needs in relationships. So when they're not getting them, there's resentment and hurt and anger building up because they're not getting what they need. They're often very disconnected from any kind of toxic feelings and the building up from them. And they're the ones that will feel deep shame or guilt, or often what I connect with most is confusion. Because again, They just know that they feel off or hurt or angry or some variation of some kind of emotion that's like the tip of the iceberg. And they can't put their finger on why they're so hurt or why they're so angry. And so it's just deep confusion. And often, since there's so much dissociation from all their real, genuine, authentic thoughts and feelings, and all this pushing down and suppression of resentment, they will often use kind of compulsive external behaviors to soothe themselves, right? So I don't even really know that I'm angry or hurt, or even exactly why I'm feeling that, because I'm very disconnected from it. But I know when I go shoe shopping and I get some really great clothes on sale, then I feel great. Or when I compulsively exercise or restrict my food, it makes me feel better. Or conversely, if I overeat in those moments, it makes me feel great. Or I use substances, drink some wine, smoke some cannabis, that, so pay attention to that. Sometimes when you're doing these compulsive behaviors, this could be an indication that you are passively communicating and not properly connecting with your thoughts and feelings and discussing them with the people involved. So the next thing is aggressive communication. So these are people who, have you ever heard the term that anger is like kind of the top of the iceberg, and underneath anger, the real feelings are like fear and hurt and loss? So aggressive communicators are people that just want the powerful emotions, right? Because if I'm angry, I'm powerful. But if I'm connecting with the fact that I'm hurt and I'm afraid, those don't feel very powerful. So they're communicators that want to stay power over the person that they're engaging with. So that will show up by threatening, intimidation, shaming the other person, overwhelming them with maybe big, strong words and big arms, and lots of the common word I use for that is bulldozing, where it's just another person is not allowed to have the space to have a thought or a feeling or a disagreement with that person, because they want to maintain the power over that person. So they need to be the one that's right, critical, controlling, blaming. But the most interesting thing about aggressive communicators is, while they're amazing at dishing out criticism, controlling, threats, intimidation, they are often the ones who are the least tolerant of receiving them. So, it certainly doesn't go both ways. Aggressive communicators are a one-way path of, I can access anger, I can access power in this relationship. I can't access any of the more vulnerable feelings underneath. And then passive aggression is the third kind of ineffective way of communicating. So it's kind of the mix of the two. So I'm not fully passive in that I know I'm angry, I know I'm hurt, I know I'm pissed, but I don't feel safe with those feelings. I think a thing I used to say is, I didn't like getting in confrontation with my partner because I would hate him so much. And I didn't feel safe, or maybe I got messages that a partner's not supposed to really hate their partner, or anger's a really scary, out of control feeling. So I didn't want to allow myself to kind of go down that path and see where that went. I didn't trust myself and my ability to regulate, or maybe even, I'm supposed to love this person. I'm supposed to need and want and be dependent on them. So that's very contradictory to hating them and being furious at them. So these are all reasons why someone might be passive aggressive. So it's not that you don't know that you're feeling these feelings, but there's messages that are just saying don't allow them to come out the way that you want them to come out. So they'll come out kind of in a seeping, really incongruent way. So I'll appear to be calm and collected, and, oh yeah, I'm over it, but I'm not over it. And kind of appear that I'm void of emotion, but I have resentment that will leak out in everything. The most common passive aggressive behavior I would do is just digs. here and there. So yeah, I'm totally over it, but maybe for the next week, I make these like really horrible digs at someone. Or sarcasm. Sarcasm is such a classic passive aggressive behavior, right? There's truth in it, but then when you see that someone gets hurt by that, really mean spirited thing that you just said or did, you just go, oh, I'm joking, man. Don't be, stop being so sensitive. It was just a joke. Um, and then deny being upset, but say hurtful things. And they're often uncomfortable with the unpleasant emotions of anger, hurt, and shame and guilt. And their attempts to appear agreeable, or they will attempt to appear to be agreeable, kind of copacetic, but really, that they are not. And this is where the meta message is. I want you to pay attention to this. If you are in a relationship or a communicator with a passive aggressive person, pay attention to meta messages, because most often you will constantly feel confusion of like, I don't know, I don't think she's over it, or I don't think he's over it. I feel like there's still this tension, and I feel like that this didn't get worked out, or I feel like you're angrier, or you're shorter in what you're saying and doing, because you'll kind of maybe see them stomping around, etc. And that is when your super ninja communication skills can come out. You can say, I know you're saying you're over this, but this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm feeling. And I feel like we need to talk about it. That's not done. So let's talk about, in the final piece, let's talk about what clear, respectful, assertive communication is. That you're openly, truthfully stating your wants, needs, thoughts while you're respecting others' expression of their own wants, needs, feelings, and thoughts. So you don't take it on as defensive. You don't take it on as these are all the ways that I'm not enough. You take it on as we're two separate people with two separate realities, two separate experiences. And this is just another human giving me feedback to help me be a better human in our walk together in life. That's really, really hard to do, but you will feel like you have amazing skills when you can kind of lean into that type of framework instead of the defensive framework or the shaming framework. You have a clear sense of value, and you can also, because you value yourself and you value others and you do really great self-care, you can provide empathy and compassion for others. One of my favorite terms that Brené Brown uses, and I've said it before, it's clear is kind. So sometimes we get so afraid to be assertive. And again, maybe there's gender messages behind it that, or cultural messages that you don't say that, you go through these weird arbitrary formalities and you don't actually say what you mean. Think about how many cultural and gender formalities tell you to not speak directly about what you want or what you need, and to kind of pretend and do these, you're supposed to say this, you're supposed to behave this way, you're supposed to do that. Like, that's not assertive communication. And clear is kind. And reference, you cannot have good communication without healthy boundaries. And I have done a couple webinars on that. So please, print out that boundary sheet and look at that, because that, by definition, supports clear communication. Clear communication is non-manipulative, so meaning it's just me expressing my own reality, my own experience, just based off on feedback. So look, I could be inaccurate, or my reality might change once I get different information from you or for somebody else, or when I sit with it and realize that a lot of my interpretation was maybe trauma-based and not really based on what's happening right here and right now. But for now, this is my reality. This is what I'm experiencing. And like, you can't really invalidate it. It's just, this is what it is. And that's me expressing my truth, regardless of the outcome or response of another person. So it's kind of partly what like Brené Brown says when she says, I want you to be seen, and fully connect with people, is kind of boldly and courageously go out there, say, this is who I am, this is what I'm feeling, this is what's going on for me, this is my experience. I could be wrong, it could change down the line. I completely accept that because I'm a flawed human being, but this is my experience. So just final things to be thinking about are, what communication style do you have and with whom? Where did you learn how to identify and express your wants and needs? Are there people you feel comfortable with to be assertive with, but others maybe that you don't feel like you communicate assertively with? How do your shame voices affect your communication? So I think I've told you that anytime, it's really interesting to be looking at what kind of topics are like hot, sensitive topics that send you into defensiveness. Um, how does your betrayal trauma, so your history of maybe being betrayed by other people, where they couldn't contain or handle or hold your thoughts and feelings or couldn't respond to them in an appropriate way, how could that affect your communication? And then thinking about for your partner, what are the difficult topics to discuss in your relationship? What tends to cause arguments? What tends to maybe cause you to have that flooding experience that I expressed earlier? What are topics that you just tend to just steer clear of? You don't want to go there, because like I was saying before, maybe you're just like, no, I'm gonna get so furious and then I'm gonna want to leave, or then I'm gonna like hate him for weeks or whatever. Like think about what those are. Like go to that dark place. Where do you guys quickly escalate? Where's the bad blood? Where's the resentment? And with this is also with family members, friends. It's a scary place to go, but think about it. What do you think contributes to these topics being difficult? So what are the history and patterns that lead you to feel this way? What parts do you struggle with hearing? That's a really great question. What are you afraid is going to come from that exchange? What parts, what does your partner struggle with hearing maybe? So this person that you want to have this engagement with, what do you think they're going to have a hard time hearing? What are you afraid of them hearing? Where do you both fall short in communicating, listening, and avoiding escalation? So last pieces are so just kind of like pointers, how to have healthy communication. Set the tone. If it's going to be a hot topic, sometimes you have to have like a conversation about having a conversation. And that's been one of the most effective things I think I've adopted is when I'm feeling fear about, oh my God, I have to bring up this subject. I'm really hurt, or I'm really upset, or I think they're going to be really hurt and upset when I say this to the person. I know if I'm ruminating already before I have the conversation, then I know I need to start with that. So I will go up to that person and say, this is a really tough topic, and I'm really afraid about your reaction to this, or I'm really afraid that this is going to turn into an argument. So, because what I feel like that does is that just kind of turns on that executive functioning instead of like all of a sudden feeling like a dog backed into a corner. It kind of gives people some warning that, okay, we're going to already rumble about something difficult, so don't be caught off guard. So that's setting the tone. Describe your feelings and experiences in the moment. So I've already talked about that. Just come from an honest, authentic place of this is my reality, this is my experience. It might change once I get feedback from you or when I realize it's trauma-based or whatever, but like just go with it and then it'll start flowing. And also your muscle's gonna be weak at first. If you're not a good communicator, if it's fear-based, trauma-based, etc., this is just a muscle that's gonna have to get built up with practice. Describe the consequences of the other person's behaviors and words. So when you say this, I feel this way. When you didn't do this, this is how I feel. This is what's happening. Offer a solution for something that doesn't feel right for you. So I feel less anxious when you use a calmer tone with me. If you're going to be running late, it would be really great if you could text me and let me know. But before you come into the discussion of something that's uncomfortable that you don't like, then come up with like, okay, so what would make me feel more comfortable? What do I want from this conversation? What am I hoping for? That's really clearly stating your wants and needs. And then acknowledge when someone is responding kind of openly, calmly, okay with you, then really acknowledge it. Thank you for listening to me. I appreciate you being able to hold the safe space for us to be talking about this. This is a really uncomfortable topic, and I'm really impressed that we can have this really mature conversation. And then if someone conversely is very reactionary and defensive or escalating, keep your boundaries. You can always hit the pause button. You can remove yourself from that conversation. Always consider your personal safety first and foremost, but just kind of learn to hit the pause button if there's escalation. And Tatkin, I never say his name right. He's, you know, a big proponent of, he has that PACT Institute, and he has that the big proponent of when you're talking about a uncomfortable subject matter, to always be making direct eye contact, face to face, to kind of help kind of down regulate that fight, flight, or freeze response, the trauma flooding response. And then I've done other videos just in closing about how to kind of unravel all intense emotions that might be present when you're in engagement with someone, in communication with them. And that can really help you. One of my favorite communication skills to close is Brene Brown uses this kind of framework of, when you do this, or when you say this, or when you did this, the story I tell myself is fill in the blank. So when you didn't call or text me all day long, the story I was telling myself all day is that you don't love me, I'm unimportant to you, maybe you're talking to that other woman again, or that other man again, and maybe you're just slowly cutting me out of your life, right? So when all else fails and you don't know how to approach somebody to talk about something very difficult, I find that to be a really great fallback exercise, is plug into the story that you're telling yourself from what's happening in front of you. And then you can start there. So when you do this behavior, when you don't do this behavior, when you do X, Y, and Z, this is what's going on in my head. This is the story that I'm telling myself. And it can be really, really effective, in my opinion. And that's it.
So I think I took a record number of notes on this one. So I've got lots. So even with I'm going to start with what you were just sharing. So, you know, one of the things I'm thinking of is, you know, the story I'm telling myself. Now, there are safe relationships, and that goes back to kind of what you said, because some of the, you know, like if I'm in an unsafe relationship, if I said, you know, the story I'm telling myself is this, and you said, well, that's just stupid, you know, and kind of immediately shut down. I know that that's not the point of communication. And you talked about, you know, building those muscles and practicing. So, you know, and I was even thinking, you know, I suspect my communication style with certain people is different than my communication style with other people, only because there are some people that are safer for me than others. And so like, as I'm learning to practice these things and to learn to have healthier communication, I'm going to need to gravitate to the people that are healthier, you know, that there's space to do that, you know, with, you know, if I'm in a relationship with an active addict, that person is going to be really defended in their lizard brain to, you know, to make it, to not hear. Let me see. I started over here with this. So, you know, and when you were talking about the words, and I was thinking, you know, and the meta messages, and I thought, you know, I think gaslighting is the meta messages don't match, you know, the words. You know, somebody is going, oh yeah, no, I'm just at a business meeting or whatever. But, you know, I think people are picking up on those meta messages. I got nailed all the time because I would do this. Now, a lot of it, I lived in Michigan. I was cold. I was constantly cold. And people thought I was angry and upset. And I had to learn to, uncross my arms, but also make sure that my face, you know, wasn't, you know, that I wasn't doing something that made it look like I'm taking a stance of that. But honestly, I spent decades cold. And so I was, you know, I was constantly this, but I also looked shut down and like not approachable. So,
right.
So I had to learn that the messages I was sending with my body language, you know, weren't what I wanted. You know, I mean, I wanted to engage with people and I wanted to be present, but I'm looking like I'm standing off and, you know, and like, don't mess with me, don't do whatever, or that I'm angry. And I mean, people would say, are you upset? And I'm like, no, you know, and I really wasn't. So it's so interesting. The fascinating too, when you're talking about, you know, gender specific rules, you know, and, you know, I'm of a certain age, and, you know, it was, you know, children had to behave, and, you know, it wasn't, I'm not from the 1800s, but, you know, it was.
Right. I've heard that saying too. So
yeah. It definitely, there was definitely the space of, you know, you behaved, and, you know, like we had to not, you know, act up and everything else. So, you know, I think we did learn to contain our, you know, emotions and behave, and particularly with girls, you know, well, that wouldn't be pretty, you know, or that wouldn't be, you know, that wouldn't be how, you know, a young lady.
How a lady behaves.
Yes, exactly. And the that now I think for men, that you are supposed to be stoic and you're not supposed to have emotions. And so, I think the stuffing emotions is definitely a thing from looking at it too. So anyway, so I can't read my writing. Yeah, the safe people. When you were talking about, the difficult topics in the flooding experience and steering clear. And I thought, it's really easy to steer clear, but then that becomes the mountain, that is between the relationship. I have found for myself too, I go to the, I need to have a difficult conversation with you. And even that, is this a good time? It's one of those making sure that I'm setting it up, so that I have, because if you're like, oh my God, I just walked in the door and whatever, like, I need to, so if they say no, can we check back in 20 minutes or what? Great. Okay. But then I've still set the table for, this is coming and, I want to prepare it so that we have the optimal thing. I think what I have appreciated when people are willing to have difficult conversations with me is I know that they want to have a relationship with me. I know that they want to go to this space because it's really easy to go, I'm going to steer clear of the relationship, not just this topic, but I'm going to steer clear of the relationship. And even if it's a family member or a significant other, it's what separates us. And then I'm not in the relationship that I want to have, with that other person. And there are some people that I've chosen. I mean, family is like, you don't have a choice, they're your family, I can choose my friends, but there are certain people that I have, even within my family, I have different relationships. I'm not as close to certain people as I am with others. That's a choice, but that's also of the stuff, that can be between us. So, I love, be clear and respectful, be open and truthful, and I really appreciated the don't be manipulative, because if I want to convert you to my side of thinking, I want you to see all of this. It's really easy. Because I was like, oh, I know for sure I could set up the message to make it sound like I'm just coming to you and, I'm just sharing this from my space, but I really want you to understand and, I want to shift it all around rather than, than looking at it. And I understand, for myself that I do have, the baggage and I do, so it's been helpful for me. And I learned it from all you therapists is, to do what I hear you say is this, and kind of reflect it back, because that gives somebody a chance to go, well, that's partially true, but, but it's really more this or whatever. But then I get a better sense of, what it is, but it's also, I can hopefully, remove some of that extra baggage. I know for sure sarcasm, I lived in sarcasm, right. And my husband is great. But fairly early in our marriage, he said, I can handle just about anything, but not your sarcasm. And I thought, if I don't learn to quit doing this, and it was always the dig, it was always, but it, and I had a quick tongue, and those would be slung out before, like zero thought, the limbic poof gone. And I thought, I'm going to lose this man who I love and who is a really good guy if I don't figure out how to turn that down. I swear I needed bandages on my tongue for a long time. But what I also found was it not only changed with him, but with all my other relationships. Right. I quit doing those little zingers. I definitely, and probably passive aggressive, but definitely liked the power emotions. I would rather be angry at you than feel hurt by you. And I learned pretty early in recovery that that's where that came from, is I wanted to hide I didn't want to deal with the hurt. So being big, when you were talking about being aggressive, I was like, the vision of being big, and the passive is kind of small, but the aggressive is being big and powerful and coming at, but it still is a barrier and a protection against, really being in a relationship and being able to really communicate. So I'm going to shut up. For if you've got questions, if you put them in the Q&A, and we will address
there's
them.
one in the Q&A.
I see some stuff in the chat. I'm going to filter through that because the chat's typically for comments that aren't for the whole group. So I'll look at that. I see there's a lot. So we have, as an addict in recovery, transparency is imperative to tell your partner about slips or uncomfortable thoughts. This almost always upsets my partner, which makes me hesitant to tell. On the other hand, if I don't tell and my partner finds out, the result is equally upsetting. Angry, hurt, rage, etc. Thoughts? That's a great question.
Great. There's an old adage in the profession of sex addiction or just even marital conflict, which I have definitely seen, which is your partner is more likely to be angry and or leave you because of the lies you tell, not the things you do. And yet we are so prone to want to hide our mistakes, our struggles, our maybe inappropriate thoughts or behaviors. But like I said at the beginning, I've learned through this work that we have incredible instincts to pick up on things. And so we might not know exactly what's going on, inappropriate thoughts, but I'll definitely pick up on your distance because maybe you're in shame that you're thinking or feeling this way. And so you feel bad about it and you're in your own struggle, and then that affects your ability to connect with me. So again, I won't know exactly what you're doing. But I'll pick up that you're not able to be fully present with me. And so that's kind of what you're robbing yourself and your partner from when you aren't able to be fully transparent or authentic or honest, is anything you withhold, you're withholding parts of yourself. And then you're also often kind of dousing yourself in shame over it, which is also a huge disconnector. So it's often a topic of needing to rumble with your own shame, I think, too, and vulnerability.
One of the things I was thinking of, first of all, I think it is important to talk to your partner about your slips. Uncomfortable thoughts, I'd talk to your sponsor. I would, like your partner does not need to know every one of your uncomfortable thoughts. But I think that's one of the discussions to have, with your partner is, here's what I want to do. But what Kristin said earlier, and I forgot to mention that because I got too many notes, but, offer a solution. So, I've had a slip and I've talked to my sponsor. I mean, these are the things I've done, but I need to be transparent with you. So, so it isn't just, oh, I've had another slip. Oh, so it's that constant trauma. And, we talk about with, Dr. Rob, it's like, trust every time trust is broken, the clock starts over. So, if this is an ongoing pattern, then, I'm going to just encourage you as a person in recovery, like you need a higher level of help because that's so hurtful for you, but also hurtful for your partner. So I would invite you to look at what you're doing and what you're not doing, and step it up. And, I talk to your therapist. I think it's one of those, and make sure it's a qualified therapist that really knows how to, to work with us. But, have a plan and start executing that plan. And hopefully, those slips up. The uncomfortable thoughts, and I shared this not too long ago. I've been in recovery a long time, and stuff still pops in my brain. It's just like I let it go quickly, so it's not like I ruminate on it. It's like, oh my God, my husband's having a beer, and it isn't. It's just poof, gone. And I've got enough tools in my toolbox to know that I don't want to hang on to that. And every, you know, I mean, I got the whole range of things, you know, and I'd pick up the phone. I would do whatever I needed to do to make sure I don't act on that. But, you know, but your partner does not need the trauma of hearing every uncomfortable thought you've had, you know, that you have about, you know, about this. The slips, yes. And I 100% agree with Kristin that, you know, that they know, and they know that something is not right. And the only way you're going to be able to rebuild trust, besides stopping, you know, slipping and getting those places, is to be able to be, you know, transparent. Do what you say you're going to do. You know, if you haven't read Out of the Doghouse, great book on rebuilding trust. Mm-hmm. Sex Addiction 101 in the workbook. If you haven't started working on that, that's a really good place, you know, to get a foundation. But you know, encourage you to step up the recovery efforts. You know, I have people that reach out, and they're like going to one 12-step meeting a week. And I'm, you know, I'm going to be honest, like with my acting out, like if I wasn't doing it, if I was awake, if I wasn't doing it, I was thinking about it and planning it, and, you know, da 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 da. So I spent lots of hours every day focused on my addiction. And I'm like, 1 hour a week of doing recovery stuff was never going to cut it. So, you know, early on, if you aren't, you know, if you aren't pursuing your recovery with, you know, a similar intensity that you pursue your addiction, you know, I'd invite you to realign, because, you know, honestly, that's what makes it change. Now, do I, you know, spend countless hours, you know, in 12-step meetings anymore? No, you know, I've gotten to a different place. You know, all of this recovery stuff is incorporated into my life, so it's how I live now. But that wasn't early on. I was like doing the recovery stuff. So hopefully that helps. So
yeah. And the other thing I've learned about when you do that really courageous step of telling your partner about a slip, or maybe sharing with sponsor or other people in recovery about your uncomfortable thoughts, is it can be really powerful. I've had clients come to me and say, I slipped. This is what I want to talk about. And we together process it so the client can gain a better understanding of maybe the steps that he or she took that led to the slip, maybe the lack of self-care, maybe high stress at work. And so when they do sit down to share what happened with their partner, it's not just, this is the behavior I engaged in, you know, I was doing middle circle behaviors, and I want you to know, but it's this full narrative of understanding. I had lots of deadlines at work. There was a lot of pressure. I kept using my deadline at work to not go to meetings. I stopped reaching out to my friends in the group, in the meetings. And so then I did X, Y, and Z to manage my stress. That, I think, is a much better received explanation of a relapse or a slip or whatever, instead of just, I did this again. And so I think it's really great for you to take some steps to fully understand and process how it happened, why it happened, what it was serving you in that time, what you need to do instead, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I agree, because otherwise it's just like, okay, the other shoe fell again, you know, and when's the next one? You know, so yeah, that's really helpful, but helpful for him, but also helpful for the partner too, because now it's like the more framed of, you know, and we always say, you know, the slip didn't happen in the moment the slip happened back here when, right, you know, when the stress at work and I wasn't taking care of myself or whatever, you know, it was way back here. And unless you figure out, you know, where that was and how to, you know, to make it different the next time, because, you know, you don't want every little trigger or, you know, little bump in the road to cause another, again, waiting for the other shoe to fall. So there's so much good stuff in recovery, and there's so many tools. I just really encourage you to, you know, to dive in. I've for years used the analogy of people straddling a picket fence when they're kind of in and they're kind of out. and a picket fence is pretty uncomfortable to straddle. So just, I keep that image of like, I don't want to straddle the fence because it's painful. So pick a side, ideally the recovery side. So now you'll never see a picket fence and not think of that. So you'll go, ooh, it looks pointy. So.
And as he is in shame for, obviously the slips and the uncomfortable thoughts, I just want to say kudos to being present, to asking questions, to asking for help. That is extremely vulnerable. That's extremely courageous. So thank you for doing that. It's really great that you're doing that.
Yeah. Yes. And for wanting to have it be different,
Right.
And that, I'm really passionate about recovery because I've been given so many gifts of recovery. And I just wish people could see how good it can be. And it's not like my life is all perfect. But like to have people want to be around me, to have connections with people, and to be attached in a healthy way to people. I mean, and you hear it's all people because I wasn't. We talk about addiction being an attachment disorder, and it doesn't matter which form of addiction you're using. You're not able to have healthy communication because your lizard brain is off going, oh, I need to go, escape from, all this emotion and uncomfortable and pleasant stuff, even the good emotions. So recovery gives you an opportunity to have the ability to connect and have communication with people and to be, at the end of the day, at the end of my life, that's what matters is the people and connections I had, not, I like my nice stuff, but it's at the end of the day, if all my pretty shoes went away, I'd be okay. So, as long as I got it. So, but anyway, okay. So I'm going to give a plug because there's some comments about we're starting a old lady posse group, and it will be next Tuesday morning at 8:30 a.m. There'll be an opportunity for partners of a certain age. It will be if you've been in a long-term relationship, whether you're leaving or you've left or you're not leaving, but it will be an opportunity different than some of the other drop-in groups. This is really going to be an opportunity to have some accountability, within the group and stuff. So I found someone who is excited about moderating that group. We've got other drop-in groups starting. We've got this webinar series. We've got a full rotation now, for the month. So every Wednesday morning at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, Eddie Caparucci will be next week. Troy Love is the following week. So I hope you continue to engage in the various opportunities and free supplemental support resources on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. And, Kristin, you can reach out to her at kristinsnowden.com. Right? I got it right? Yes.
Yep.
She's got, and there are more of these videos on YouTube, so that you can learn more. So don't hesitate to reach out if we can be of help. But since there aren't any other questions or comments, I think it's been lovely to see you again, Kristin. Thank you, all of you that are joining us, and hope to see you next time.
Yes, thank you for attending, and I'll see everyone next month.
Bye-bye.
Bye.